This is the Washington Times front page for Wednesday, January 10th, 2024. Thanks for joining us. I'm George Gerbo. Border security negotiations on Capitol Hill keep running into a critical problem. Republicans don't trust the Biden administration to follow through with any tough measures. Ramsey Touchberry and Stephen Dinan report lawmakers returned to Washington this week with little progress on border negotiations, the linchpin of broader talks about President Biden's request for an emergency $110 billion national security spending bill. That proposal includes military aid for Ukraine and Israel. Significant hurdles include how much the deal would restrict the president's actions to control the southern U.S. border, including the use of parole. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has blanketed Iowa at the expense of all other early voting states in a bid to keep his campaign alive against prohibitive frontrunner Donald Trump. Susan Ferricchio reports he now faces a surging Nikki Haley, who could steal second place from him in the Iowa caucuses next Monday and potentially force him out of the race. The two are statistically tied. Polling averages show Haley with 16.3% of the vote, slightly above DeSantis's 16%. Haley has been helped by a late advertising spending binge in Iowa. In the Republican presidential debate Wednesday, DeSantis is poised to attack Haley on a handful of issues that he hopes will diminish her in the eyes of Iowa voters and help him remain the leading alternative. Federal appeals court judges were skeptical of former President Trump's claim of absolute presidential immunity from charges that he conspired against the U.S. in an attempt to overturn the 2020 election. Tom Howe reports a three-judge panel of the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia questioned attorney Dean Sauer's claim that the nation's founders thought a president would have to be impeached and convicted by Congress before facing criminal prosecution. Judge Florence Pan wondered whether a president could be prosecuted, for instance, for directing Navy SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival. The judges said Trump's defense undermined its argument of absolute immunity by conceding that a president could be prosecuted after an impeachment. They also wondered whether it should decide the issue or return it to a trial court, which ruled against Trump. Despite what critics say are mounting danger signs, the Pentagon insists that conflict with China is neither imminent nor inevitable. Bill Gertz reports an open-source analysis of war preparation measures indicates a conflict with China may not be imminent, but indicators that war can be avoided indefinitely are more obscure. CIA Director William Burns said the Chinese military has doubts about a successful invasion of Taiwan. Still, he warned in a recent speech that the risks of conflict are likely to grow the further out you get into this decade. The assurances are increasingly tough to sell to many in Congress. House Armed Services Committee Chairman Mike Rogers said U.S. military commanders and intelligence officials warned that Chinese military forces are getting ready for action as soon as 2027. And finally, Foreign Affairs reporter Andrew Salmon previews presidential and legislative elections coming up in Taiwan on Saturday. Taiwanese voters in the combined election will choose a new president and the 113 members of its legislature. Find all of today's front page stories at WashingtonTimes.com/front page or on the Washington Times app, and find us wherever you get your podcasts. Just search Washington Times in your favorite podcast app. You can also find us on social media at Wash Times for breaking news, sports, commentary, and more. For the Washington Times, I'm George Gerbo.